1917 was a year of important changes in the First World War. A revolution broke out in Russia, and shortly after that, the country signed a peace treaty with Germany. Although this event was beneficial for the Central Powers, later that year, another great power, the United States, entered the war on the side of the Entente. From the beginning, the German U-boat attacks had outraged the US, especially when ships were sunk. For the US, an Entente victory was also important from an economic aspect, since America had been exporting enormous amounts of goods to these countries during the war. Now that the balance of power had been tipped in favor of the Entente, the outcome of the war was practically decided. In the spring of 1918, the German High Command ordered a desperate attack on the Western Front. They were hoping to secure a victory before the American army, over 1 million strong, landed in Europe. But the land attack petered out, and the war of the U-boats also ended in defeat. Germany and its allies were exhausted, both militarily and economically. From the summer of 1918, the Entente achieved a series of decisive victories. The German army was forced to retreat. By this time, an effective means had been found to end trench warfare after a barrage of drumfire tanks simply broke through the lines of defense. The coordinated attack was aided from above by airplanes. In the autumn of 1918, Germany's allies, having suffered total defeat, surrendered one by one. When revolution broke out in Germany, the only choice left was to capitulate. The armistice was signed in a railway carriage in the forest of Compiègne. Thus, the First World War ended with the defeat of the Central Powers. The war caused immense suffering and destruction. Nearly 10 million soldiers died on the battlefields, and the same number of civilians fell victim to hunger and epidemics. The war brought drastic changes worldwide. Revolutions broke out, and the established social order was swept away. Chaos and confusion reigned all over Europe. Two of the victorious powers, Great Britain and France, were also exhausted by the war. The real winner was the United States, becoming the major economic and political power in the world. Japan gained power in the Far East. The war also led to fundamental political changes in victorious Russia, and the defeated countries had to face future consequences. When the war broke out, the military strength of the belligerents was balanced. However, the long, drawn-out struggle tipped the balance in favor of the Entente. Their geographical position was favorable from a military point of view, since the Central Powers were surrounded by Entente states, Russia on the east and Great Britain and France on the west. Due to the larger total population of the Entente countries, they managed to send more soldiers to the fronts. The enormous economic resources in the hands of Britain and France, and provided by their colonies, also represented an advantage over the Central Powers. Military commanders in both camps developed offensive strategies and expected the war to be brief and quick. But they soon realized the war would last longer than they had expected. Germany planned a rapid strategic knockout in the hope of quick victory. The German leaders in Berlin were aware that the country's economy was not able to sustain a long war. They wanted the main force of the army to invade France through neutral Belgium and secure victory in the West within 1 month. Meanwhile, in the East, the army of the Austro-Hungarian Empire was supposed to hold back the slowly mobilizing Russian army. In reality, however, events took a completely different turn. The armies fought continuously on the battlefields between 1914 and 1918. These armies numbered millions of soldiers. The advent of machine guns and heavy artillery supported defensive tactics. Soldiers dug trenches which provided excellent protection against enemy bullets. In these circumstances, risking an attack resulted in huge losses, but no discernible advantage for either side. Trench warfare led to a deadlock. Technical improvements also changed the way the war was fought. Thousands of soldiers were transported by trains and automobiles at speeds never seen before. Apart from improvements to traditional means of warfare, new types of weapons were also introduced. It was during the First World War that poison gas and tanks were deployed for the first time. The military use of submarines and airplanes also became widespread. Thus, the age of technological wars had begun. Due to nationalist sentiments, the war was welcomed enthusiastically in most countries. But soon, the mood changed. Not only was the war fought on the battlefields, but it also transformed the everyday lives of the people on the home front. Everything was subordinated to the arms industry. On the home front, there was a growing shortage of most goods, which led to the introduction of rationing, that is, the reduction of the amount of certain goods people were allowed to buy. Since most men were fighting on the fronts, women took their place in factories. The long, drawn-out war was a huge burden on the population. Hunger became widespread. Due to the enormous losses and privation, people now wanted peace. But the war still raged on. By the beginning of the 20th century, tension among the great powers had further intensified. The French were intent on seizing control over Alsace-Lorraine at any cost, leading to permanent hostility with Germany. The Germans were arming fast. They built a modern fleet, causing great concern in London. In the Balkans, the interests of the Austro-Hungarian Empire and Russia clashed. Serbia, supported by Russia, was obstructing the expansion of the Habsburg Empire. Prior to the First World War, two opposing military blocs were formed. The Central Powers, that is, the alliance between Germany and the Austro-Hungarian Empire, faced the Triple Entente, formed by Great Britain, France, and Russia. The spark that set off the war was the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand and his wife on their visit to Sarajevo, the capital of Bosnia-Herzegovina, by a member of a Serbian national organization in the summer of 1914. This event was reason enough for the Austro-Hungarian Empire to settle old scores with Serbia. Encouraged by Germany, Franz Josef declared war on Serbia on the 28th of July, 1914. This, in turn, caused Russia to enter the war in defense of Serbia. During the course of the following few days, the members of the two military blocs exchanged declarations of war, and the First World War broke out. It was for two deep-rooted reasons that the Balkan conflict grew into a world war. One was the expansionist and aggressive imperialist policy aimed at the redivision of the world. The other reason was the inability of the great powers at the beginning of the 20th century to settle their differences by peaceful negotiations. The war was the continuation of politics by other means. Soon, more countries, both inside and outside of Europe, joined one or the other military bloc. Turkey and Bulgaria joined the Central Powers. The Triple Entente found new allies in Italy and Romania. Later, Japan and the United States also entered the war on the side of the Entente. Battles took place not only in Europe, with the war also spreading to Africa and Asia. There were also naval battles, but the British fleet remained undefeated. The most decisive battles were fought in Europe. The Western Front stretched across France and Belgium. The battles on the Eastern Front were fought in Russia. And the South saw the establishment of the Balkan Front first, and then the Italian Front.